Well, happy Monday, everybody. I hope you had a good weekend. I'm looking forward to this week and sharing these video devotions with you. So, thank you for being part of our family of faith and joining us each day for these devotions. Today, we are in Genesis chapter 36. So, I invite you to open your Bible with me there, Genesis chapter 36. And the headline I wrote in my personal journal after reading and praying about this chapter was Not All Blessings Are Equal. Not all blessings are equal. Um, Genesis makes it very clear that Esau became very wealthy, became a leader, that he conquered the territory of Seir, and the inhabitants then became part of his kingdom. And he and his descendants became the kings and the regional rulers of that part of the Middle East. And in time, that became known as the kingdom of Edom. And if you're in Genesis 36 in verse 20, if you'll look at verse 20, it says, "And these are the sons of Seir the Horite and the inhabitants of the land." Then it goes on to list his descendants because uh, uh, Seir was that area was had a king named who was also by that name, so it was named after him, and his descendants had ruled that area until Esau conquered it, and then they became his servants, if you will, subservient to him. And that's even mentioned back in Genesis chapter 14, verse 6. It talks about when Abraham was there was this war between various kings, and this Seir and the Horites were part of that battle. But you might be interested to see over in Deuteronomy. So just go ahead and take a moment and turn in your Bible past Leviticus and so on, get over Numbers and get over to Deuteronomy chapter 2 and look at verse 12. And it says, "The Horites formerly lived in Seir, but the sons of Esau dispossessed them and destroyed them from before them and settled in their place, just as Israel did to the land of their possession, which the Lord gave to them." In other words, in history, we know that the Jewish people, following the Exodus from Egypt, conquered the Promised Land, and it became theirs in fulfillment of the promise of God to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, the inhabitants of Seir, that region is a mountainous area south of the Dead Sea, was conquered by Esau, and then he and his descendants were the kings and rulers of that. So Esau became a powerful man, a wealthy man with his own kingdom, and chapter 36 lists all of his descendants. So it's kind of a summary of Esau's family and their blessing. Now, you remember when Esau stole or Jacob stole Esau's blessing. Jacob, the younger brother, stole the blessing of Esau, and that's why he had to leave and go to Haran and spend 20 years there. And after Isaac and Esau realized that Jacob and Rebekah had deceived him, Esau pleaded with his dad to give him a blessing, and Jacob or Isaac rather did actually give him a blessing back in Genesis 27. You read this a few days ago, but look at it again in Genesis 20, and this is all going to tie together in just a moment. In Genesis 27, verses 39 and 40, "Then Isaac his father answered and said to him," to Esau, "Behold, away from the fertility of the earth shall be your dwelling, and away from the dew of heaven from above. By your sword you shall live." Notice that. "By your sword you shall live, and your brother," referring to Jacob, "you shall serve. But it shall come about when you become restless that you will break his yoke from your neck." So, by Jacob stealing Esau's blessing, Jacob became Esau's Lord. But God blessed Esau by fulfilling the blessing that Isaac gave him, and he did live by the sword. He conquered the territory of Seir. It was a military conquest. He lived by the sword, and he conquered that area. It's a mountainous area, but it's a desert type area. It's not lush and green like we think of the mountains here in parts of America. And he did break Jacob's yoke because he became so powerful during his lifetime. He was no longer subservient to Jacob. So the blessing that Isaac gave Esau was fulfilled, and we see that in Genesis and in chapter 36. Now, what about Jacob? Because Jacob also had a blessing. You know, it's the one he stole, but Jacob was also going to be the one through whom God will fulfill the promise that he originally gave Abraham to build a great nation. Then he gave it to Isaac to build a great nation through his descendants. And then Jacob became the heir of that blessing, that promise. Chapter 36. So chapter 36 is all about Esau. But chapter 37, verse 1, now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned in the land of Canaan. So Esau's outside Canaan in Seir, next door to it, really. But Jacob remained a sojourner, a wanderer, if you will, in the land of Canaan. So when you look at it on the surface, Esau ended up with a bigger blessing. Because in Esau's lifetime, he became the ruler of a kingdom and very wealthy. Jacob was a wanderer. Now, Jacob was wealthy and he had a large family and servants and so on, but he was a wanderer, not owning very much land. And then for 400 years, for 4 centuries, his descendants were slaves in Egypt. And the whole time the descendants of Jacob were slaves in Egypt, those 4 centuries, Esau's descendants had a kingdom, the kingdom of Edom, through which actually the Israelites had to pass on their way to the promised land following the Exodus 4 centuries later. So here's the point. When you look at it from the human perspective, for 400 years, for 4 centuries, it looked like Esau actually received the greater blessing. Jacob was a wanderer and his descendants were slaves. But in the end, what happened? The kingdom of Edom ceased to exist. And the descendants of Jacob, the Jewish people, the nation of Israel, still exist. And through them, the world was blessed with the Messiah, Jesus Christ. So what I'm saying is sometimes we see what is and don't see what will be. Sometimes we see what is tangible, physical, and not what is spiritual and relational and more important. In the short run, it looked like Esau received the greater blessing, but in the end, it was Jacob. It was Jacob who had the greater blessing. So don't allow what is momentary and what is physical and tangible to blind you to the more important realities, the long-term realities in life. That's one of the lessons for me as I read this chapter about all of Esau's descendants that can get kind of boring, but when you really think about it, there's a lot of truth. There's a lot of spiritual lessons for us. The temporary is not as important as the eternal, and what is right in front of you is sometimes misleading, so be careful. Hey, God bless you. Hope this helps, and I'll see you tomorrow.